Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I'm a business psychologist, army veteran and everyday adventurer. I will be sharing my conversations with some truly incredible guests who are weaving adventure into their daily lives. And I really hope that these conversations inspire you to undertake your own everyday adventures too. So today I am super excited. Here we are in season 8, and Hetty Kingston is somebody I've had on my list of people to talk to for ages. So this is a really exciting moment for me. But Hetty is an adventurer. She's an author. She's an event organiser, and she's a self-confessed data geek who is absolutely passionate about improving accessibility and inclusion in the outdoors. Her many achievements include organising the Women's Trad Festival. She's organiser for Peak Gravel Gang and the Running Out of Time relay between COP26 and 27 to highlight the perils of climate change. And when she's not up to her eyeballs in spreadsheets and logistics, she relaxes by climbing and mountain biking and wild swimming, often with her twin toddlers in tow, which I think is even more remarkable considering all the other things she takes on. But just to give you a sense of why I was so keen to get Hetty to come onto the podcast. So I heard Hetty talk about her recent adventure where she took on a bikepacking race with her twins. And I heard her talk at the Kendal Mountain Festival. And I mean, there was obviously the huge achievement just in undertaking something like this, which I think is probably certainly past the realms of where I was when I had my one child at the time, followed by another one 2 years later. And I could barely get out the door for a pint of milk. So I think there was the sort of, the remarkable achievement in just undertaking something like that. But I think what really connected with me, it was just such a warm, funny, honest talk about her experiences of the event, of trying to juggle parenthood with the twins and their needs and managing her own, I guess, her frictions in her own mind around what she was used to being able to, what she wanted to do, what she needed to be able to do in that moment. And it was just such a brilliant talk that obviously I went and accosted her afterwards. So apologies, Hetty, for grabbing you. I think it was in the Rab area of the Kendal Mountain Festival, and asked her if she'd come on the podcast to talk about some of these themes around our identities, our multiple identities as we go through life, and how those change and how we can reconcile those or not. So Hetty, welcome to the show. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. And thank you for such a lovely introduction. It's made my day.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, well, this is a good start to a conversation always. So I guess where I'd like to begin is with you just giving, just tell me a little bit more about your relationship with the outdoors, relationships with adventuring outside, and just how you sort of got into this world without necessarily, you having to give me your entire backstory, because I know that can take a while. But I'm just really interested in how you would, encapsulate that part of you and what it means to you, I suppose.
So when I grew up, I had quite an outdoorsy upbringing. We always spent a lot of time outside and did a lot of walking. But I wouldn't say I was particularly sporty or adventurous. In fact, at school, I think one of the teachers said she'll never make a runner. And it was only really, and I played a little bit of hockey at university, but it was only really when all my friends had left university and I was in Sheffield, which is where I went to uni, and I was in this city that I knew really well, but I didn't know anybody there. And it was kind of then when I turned to the outdoors and sort of started mountain biking and climbing. And it was very haphazard approach. I think when it came to climbing, I just showed up at one of the local walls at the beginner's session and just kept going until I'd made a few friends. And with mountain biking, I resurrected my dad's ancient mountain bike, which I mean was wholly inappropriate, but I had no idea because to me it was a bike. And just started essentially trying to ride it up and down hills in the Peak District. And the way I met people there was largely because most people were stopping me to be like, what are you riding? Or it would fall apart, or something would go wrong. But yeah, I kind of went from 0 to 60 really. On the running side, I I'd done a half marathon. I think I'd done the Great North Run, which was great, and I'd enjoyed it. But that was years and years ago. And then I saw this flyer for a race in the Lake District called Lake Sky Ultra, and it was kind of a scrambly, quite adventurous ultra marathon. And I just thought, hey, why not? Like, if I run a marathon, people will ask me how fast I've done it, and they'll expect a certain time. Whereas if I do an ultra marathon, then essentially the longer I take, the more impressive it sounds, provided I finish. So I very much was a 0 to 60 for me. Didn't have a particularly strong adventure CV. I didn't come from a place of knowledge. I came from, some very hectic Googling and a lot of trying to meet people and be like, can I come with you? Would you teach me what you know?
I love that. Yeah, no, it's really interesting, isn't it? When you have that sort of, it's almost like sort of that beginner's mindset of just going, oh, well, I don't know anything, so I'm going to ask lots of people and embrace that approach rather than I need to be an expert in order to take part in something. And I was just wondering, how did that sort of continue to shape your life? I guess up until the point at which you've had children, and knowing that it continues to shape your life, since they've been born as well. But, in terms of your work, in terms of the sort of things you were doing, how did that continue?
I think the impact the outdoors has had on my life is pretty immeasurable. I'd say that I was, before discovering all this adventure and the outdoors, I'd say I struggled a lot with my mental health. And I could never find sort of like a healthy outlet for some of the negative energy I had. And when I came to the outdoors, and it kind of has both ends of the spectrum. You go on a nice walk, or you go on a kind of calmer activity, or you climb, and it can be really mindful, and it can really help you escape and get away from those feelings. But then also pushing yourself really hard and finding your limits, and the sort of cycling and running, and I do a lot of skiing and mountaineering, and that kind of ticked a different box. And yeah, I think originally it was a huge escape from what was in my head, but that transformed. I kind of transformed into, instead of just being about escape, it was about finding joy, and it was very much a place of happiness. So it's definitely transformed my life at that point. And then I think coming into motherhood, that's been a really challenging journey, if I'm honest. I think, for a start, pregnancy. I when I found out I was pregnant, I always thought I'd be one of these really active mums. Like, I've got a lot of friends who've done incredible things during their pregnancy, and I follow a lot of people on Instagram that I find hugely inspiring, and they're very much about moving and keeping going and not letting anything stop you. And I was like, that will be me. I will be just riding. I'd planned on doing. There's a bikepacking journey called Badger Divide, which is long and definitely inappropriate for a pregnant woman probably to try if too far down the line. But I was like, yeah, well, probably let's think about Badger Divide. We can just do it really slowly, and I'll be really careful. Not inappropriate, that's probably the wrong word, but it's at the upper end of activity. And I found out I was pregnant, which was great news, but I felt as sick as a dog. I literally couldn't really stand without feeling really sick. I was knackered all the time. All my expectations for what I thought I'd do and how my relationship with the outdoors would be, was pretty much wiped out the window overnight. Partly because I found out I was expecting twins, which explains some of the kind of the sickness side of things, and just generally wondering at why at sort of 10 to 12 weeks, I was like, I actually don't fit in my clothes already, and this is a first pregnancy, and that feels like, everyone's like, oh, you'll just be bloated. And I'm like, it feels a bit more than bloating. But yeah, I think how my relationship changed, I then had to approach the outdoors in a completely different way, in a way I hadn't before, which was a lot slower and a less about something high octane or adrenaline seeking, or I had to approach it in a much calmer way, but also it's there when I can do it, as opposed to like a given that I could just go out and sort of do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. So that was definitely a learning curve, and probably something that continued. Identity shifted again going into motherhood, but I'd say that relationship with the outdoors has constantly been there, but has taken so many different forms.
It's so interesting. I think that's such an interesting point as well about our expectations of the person we think we're going to be, or the person that, in a way others also expect us to be, or that, and that's where I think social media, as you say, can play such a great role in terms of inspiring, going, look, this is still all possible. But at the same time, when we're not able to live up to what we think we should be doing, it can be incredibly challenging. I mean, I didn't have twins, but I do remember with my son, being I think I stopped running at 12 weeks, having gone, yes, I'm going to be doing all this again through pregnancy. And my son was like, oh, this really hurts. I don't really like it. I think I might just do a little bit of wiggly yoga on the bedroom floor. And that's about it, really. But I think that wrestle that you then have about who am I and what am I? And then I think that also that pressure around, well, you must be doing something wrong. There must be, how come everybody else that you see is able to do these things, and, you're not able to do them, or you find it difficult, or, I think that can be really challenging from a psychological perspective as well.
I think for years I've always had the mentality of, if you try hard enough, you can generally make things work, and that is so not true. It helps in occasions, but also there are some things where you have to have acceptance. You have to look internally and really think, where am I at, and what is sensible for where I'm at. So, for example, in pregnancy, I suddenly had this situation where I was like, I can't just throw a load of effort at this. Like the fact that I really want to get out on my bike, but I feel really sick and I'm really tired, or, later down the line, I had like a few complications. You can't just try hard and get over it. I think that's quite an old school attitude, and I didn't realize maybe how deep that ran until I was essentially put in a corner and not told, but like had to learn some self-acceptance and a lot more self-compassion, which was really challenging, but definitely a good lesson, I think.
No, I think it's so hard, and I think that I think we don't realize how ingrained that sort of mindset maybe is in us individually, but also from a societal perspective, that is what's perpetuated through any sort of social media feed you go on, that effectively you are in control of your own destiny, and it's just about effort, and it's just about deciding you want to do it. I think we had a very brief conversation before I pressed record about the sort of the just do it school of adventure thought, which is that it's about you deciding to do something and then doing it and I think certainly for me, one of the biggest lessons parenthood has taught me is that I'm absolutely fundamentally not in control of anything and I have no idea what's going on. And as you say, that is both incredibly humbling and slightly depressing, and at the same time of quite freeing, because it's if you can find a way, as you say, to find that self-compassion to go, actually, it's all right, you're a human being and this is all new and your body is your body, then it releases you from some of that pressure too, I think.
Definitely. And then I think that really made me appreciate the outdoors so much more. I definitely appreciated it already, but I had a sudden new sort of angle on it and I think it made me really much more aware of maybe some of the barriers that other people face. I was particularly lucky when I was coming into it all that, I generally avoided injury. I met people that were happy to share their learnings with me. I had a lot of beginner's luck, and it was it was good insight to almost have to go back to the beginning again, but with some more challenges in place.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about your bike packing race then, and how this all came about. Fast forwarding a year or so.
No, I think it actually links in perfectly. I think, when you become a mum, you or I definitely worried about leaving part of me behind. The kind of, I guess, like the adventurous side of me, maybe the more career driven, the very focused. I was like, oh, like I'm loving learning being Annie and Flo's mum. I'm really enjoying discovering motherhood, but like I feel like this part that that's not with me. And I felt like I needed something to focus on as well that wasn't, the nappy changes, that wasn't kind of the sleep schedule. I didn't even know what the word sleep regression meant before, like, before I had kids. I was really naive and I was enjoying learning everything, but I felt like I needed something that combined both like pre kids Hetty and like kids Hetty. So I guess normally the option is if you want to do a big challenge and you've just had kids, it's to leave them behind. Um, but I kind of felt really strongly I like didn't want to do that because I wanted to be able to try and combine these two worlds, and I didn't know if it was even possible, but I thought I'm going to try. And so essentially, fast forward to like about this time last year, I ended up on the start line of a long distance bikepacking race in Switzerland, which was pretty incredible. And like, I mean, huge kudos to the event organizer who slightly planted the seed of the idea when I was pregnant and said, "Hey, you should come back with the kids," and then actually allowed me when I said, "Hey, I'm gonna come back with the kids." um, yeah, so Dead Ends and Cake is a self-supported bikepacking race in Switzerland. You go to 5 remote checkpoints, all in kind of like beautiful places at the tops of mountains and things like that on gravel roads. And you've got 3 days to get them. So, oh, and the important thing, most important thing, at the end of at each checkpoint, there's a piece of cake. So you've got 3 days to get them and essentially go and collect all the cake.
That sounds like the perfect adventure to do with kids. Less the bike packing part, because yeah, I mean that's quite big and epic. But definitely the cake part is awesome. So you're there on the start line and have it, like you said, and I imagine there's probably quite a lot of logistics that was sort of organised in order to get you to the start line in the first place. I mean, once you set off, because I think one of the conversations I often have with people is about that tension between organising ourselves in terms of, planning for a big adventure and all that energy that goes into planning, and then versus okay, I'm just going to sign up and see what happens and go with the flow a bit. And with one of the challenges with children, as anybody knows, is that it's one, you have to go with the flow, but at the same time, you need to be planned for pretty much every eventuality that may ever hit. And I was just interested in how you reconciled those different needs and requirements and I guess what was going through your mind as you sort of set off.
I think my goal was to get to the start line. And I knew if I got to the start line and I got 3 kilometers in, that would have been a success to me. Because as we've said, the kids are so unpredictable and there's so many logistics. And I knew if I got to the start line, I'd have done what I set out to. In terms of what was in my head, I think my head was dominated by my main fear, which was the fact that my stuff, the bike, the kids, everything weighed, or what I was towing, essentially weighed 60 kilograms.
Wow.
Which is quite weighty. And everyone else around me was like lycra clad, like super lightweight bikes. And like one person was like, they're like eyeing up me and the girls, and they're like, "Oh, are you supporting?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm racing." Yeah. And I think I always had, if I'm being completely honest, I always had a slight worry about being judged for the welfare of the girls and people thinking, "Oh, you're just taking them on this really long ride because you want to do it." And at every step of the way, even right at the beginning when they first went in the trailer, it was a question of everything was centered around their happiness. If they didn't like being in the trailer at step 1, then that was it. The idea wouldn't have come about. It came about because they loved being in there. And the whole route design and planning and logistics, everything was, where are all the play parks? What are the nice points I can stop and let them get out and have a little kind of wiggle or walk around? An hour into the race, we stopped for a sit down meal and they had like their breakfast porridge. It was all it was all centered around them and their happiness. But at the same time, I definitely was fearful that people looking in on the outside would maybe think, who's this crazy lady who's gonna tie her children into a trailer and drag them round an ultramarathon race? Like, yeah, that was so I definitely had a bit of, I don't know if guilt's the right word, but yeah, like fear of being judged. I think it's definitely something that was there.
Yeah. And I think that point about judgment, I mean, I think that was one of the biggest shocks to me when I became a parent, was this: suddenly you are plunged into a world that feels incredibly judgmental. Every choice you make, everything you do, I mean, in the end, that it's impossible to get it right. And that there is this idea out there of, I think, particularly the perfect mother, and how she should behave in any given situation. And as you said, that sort of idea that, and I think it's so interesting because obviously you took on quite a very big adventure with your kids. But I think even when you take on what might be perceived as very small adventures, I think that judgment can be pervasive. I know, that women who go out for an evening and leave their babies behind, or their kids behind, will experience those same sort of feelings. So I think it's such a relatable feeling, and I can only imagine how it was sort of magnified given the situation you're in as well.
I think one thing that helped though is the moment I started, it went away because there's so much to think about. There was, whether it was, working out when the next stop was and what I was doing, whether it was, thinking about the weather and what, like, constantly safe risk assessing. There was a lot of on the ground risk assessing for the girls. And just navigating and then doing everything that comes with what you normally do in a long distance race. And I think this really strange thing is, normally in these things, I like put my head down and I get on, and that's how I, going back to we're touching again on that kind of like trying hard side of things,
Yeah.
but that's been my approach, and it's worked really well. And suddenly to have to do all these stops and nappy changes and constantly, like, you get into the flow of it but then you're stopping again, was like the biggest challenge, and it's really interesting to grapple with that. And I think it probably came to a head on day 2, which started with this, like, basically 35 kilometers of uphill to this beautiful but really hard sort of gravel switchbacks. And I'm there kind of like part pushing, part, and because when it gets really steep, and the thing with the trailer is you can't necessarily cycle it. You have to, or found I had to put my bike on my back and then push the trailer.
Wow.
Because it was it's too steep to ride, and you can't really push the bike pulling the trailer. It's all a bit it all feels a bit sketchy. But yeah, I was going up this climb and I was just thinking, I was thinking I could just go back down and that'd be it. That'd be me done. Everyone would say well done. I could just finish here. And I realized I kind of really pushed myself, and I thought, why am I thinking this? Why am I in this headspace of wanting to quit? And I was like, oh, it's because I'm done. It's because I'm done. And I properly questioned myself, and I wasn't physically. I was just really slow. I was just really uncomfortable with how slow I was going, and I wasn't used to going that slowly. And the moment I kind of realized that and was like, okay, I just need to accept that I'm going to be like a snail, then it kind of all came back again. But it was really interesting to have to learn to kind of tolerate a new level of slowness.
Yeah, well, I guess that's when we talk about, I think people often think about the identities in terms of sort of this fixed identity of, like, you're someone who's got the freedom as an individual, and then you're a parent, or you're a carer, or you've got other responsibilities, and that's the challenge. But I think, what you illustrate so interestingly there is actually the challenge is often internal to ourselves, of what we expect, or this idea that we have of ourselves and what we perceive is the right way to go through something, or that struggle in terms of going, actually, I really want to go fast, I really want to go and compete and push myself and do all the things that I know I can do, and I'm having to reconcile that with the bit of with the reality of that, actually that's not what this is about. But that doesn't mean it's any less difficult to do, to accept it.
It's yeah, it was interesting, but I did keep going. And
I was about to say, I mean, it's
yeah,
incredible in itself.
I also had this rule. I've got a little bike computer, and essentially, as the climbs go up and down, it gives them a color: red, green, yellow. Obviously, red is really hard. And I had a rule that you can't quit when my bike computer was on a red climb. I could only quit when it had gone to green again. And that was essentially the whole 35 kilometers. But it meant by the time I got there, there was 3 pieces of cake because we all got a piece of cake waiting for us. The sun had come out. It was absolutely stunning. Everyone at the checkpoint was amazing. There was bonus coffee. Someone was just like, "Do you want a coffee?" And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great." And so I was like fully switched back on and into kind of like into going forward mode again.
I think that's a wonderful rule for life, actually. Don't quit when you're on a red. It's like,
Yeah, don't wait till it's green.
yeah, wait till it's green, because I think there's also something about what's going on in our brain at that point, and that, even, I obviously, doing a lot of work around sort of psychology around comfort zones and fear and stuff around that whole fight, flight, freeze, that's every part of your body is telling you in that moment that this is completely rubbish and that you should either get out of there or stop, or or do something. And that actually, that, as you say, if you're wanting to make a decision based on what's real, you have to give time for that decision making bit of your brain to start functioning again. But yeah, I can imagine those red moments. That was probably pretty tough. Um, so when fast forward a few steps, and you complete this incredible achievement with your girls. I mean, looking back on it, what are the things, I guess, that you've taken away from it, that you feel you learnt from it, that in a way you didn't expect to, or you hadn't really thought about before you took on the adventure?
That's a really good question. I think I learned that it's it is possible to combine those two bits, the old Hetty, pre-kids Hetty, and the kind of post-kids Hetty. I didn't, because I genuinely didn't know if that was possible. They felt too at odds going in. Um, and I think I learned that, I don't know how to, this might sound really cheesy, but it's like you can try really hard and ground yourself at the same time. So there are moments that felt really stressful, like take where the kids, because they did have their moments where, like all babies and toddlers, where they both wanted different things. It was it was raining, food, like I needed food, they needed food. And in those moments, I found kind of a new way to like just stop and catch my breath a little bit more. And I think that's really helped in coming back in day-to-day parenting. I mean, God, I still have those moments where I want to hide in a cupboard. Um, but it definitely, I don't know how and why I found it on the race, but it definitely has helped me in everyday life a bit more.
Gosh, I'm beginning to think maybe I need to go and do a bikepacking, like maybe not with my teenagers, because yeah, that would be a lot. But yeah, I could do with some help with the grounding bit, definitely. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like you said, that how you cope in those moments when it seems sometimes impossible to cope. And again, I think a lot of people listening to this will relate to those, just, what do I do here? Actually, we're all melting down. It all feels too much. What resources have I got to enable me to sort of make it through?
I think for me, it was almost a lack of resource, the fact that it was so like stripped back, and it was like, okay, right, I'm here in the middle of a forest, and this is it. This is what we've got. Like, I mean, obviously, like for anyone listening, I had backup. There was a lot of backup for me if they just didn't want to go any further. But in those moments, there kind of wasn't anything else around me, so I had to literally be like, what can I draw on? And it was like, I'm in a beautiful place. Okay, right, deep breath. Like, yeah, but I realized I feel like it sounds really cheesy, but I just hadn't I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before to do something like that.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking as well. I mean, when you talk about drawing on resources, what do you think you had maybe as a result of your previous, whether, I suppose, whether your previous experiences of adventure or, doing hard things, whether that was something that you found you were able to access in those moments, or did it just feel so different, I guess?
No, it felt like I could definitely draw on that. And I felt that I knew myself, and I knew, like, in how hard I was pushing myself. I knew the threshold I wanted to be in, and I didn't want to go, right to 100%. I always kept some back, and I knew where I wanted to be there. So I felt like I had quite a lot of control over where I was at. The thing I had no control over was where Annie and Flo decided, how they decided to be, and generally they were really happy and a joy to cycle around with. But of course there were moments. But yeah, you mentioned sort of there's adventure and previous experience, what you can bring from that. One thing I have found that's been extremely helpful as a parent who has previously done adventure is I can pack a bag. I can pack a bag really well.
I'd say that's an essential skill, to be honest, as a parent.
Yeah, it's not, how yes, I have another friend who is saying basically they just can't seem to, they always forget things. And I'm like, nope, that's the one thing I'm good at. I can pack a bag as if it's adventure pretty well.
Also, it's not just the psychological tools, it's the practical ones too.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So I slightly hesitate to ask this because, I mean, obviously you did do quite something pretty big with your girls, but have you got what's next? Have you got anything else that either you've got planned or that you would like to take on, or how, I suppose, maybe more interestingly as well, is, how has that sort of shaped your life since you've come back? What have you drawn from it, and what are you taking forward?
I think it showed me that combining those two things is possible, but it also showed me that was a moment. That was a moment where it worked. The twins were the right age, they were the right size, they were the right sort of concentration span for wanting to sit in the trailer, and they're definitely not that now. So you kind of say, what's next? And I actually, for pretty much the first time in my life, other than during pregnancy, there isn't anything next. And that's a really weird feeling. But I'm trying to sort of dial back and enjoy all the smaller things. So for example, we're going to go on holiday just to like the south and go do some little bits of cycling in the New Forest and stuff like that. And I'm trying to come to a place where like that is enough too. Because adventure will always be there and big adventures will come back. But at the minute, it's just not compatible with having, two-year-old twins. Can't get the training in for the amount of time. And, they are far more interested in trying to ride their own little bikes than sitting in the attached to a trailer at the back of mine. And that's actually totally fine. And it's really good for me in a way, I think, to have to sort of take more from smaller adventures and find the same joy in planning them, which I definitely do, because you still need to do a lot of logistics just to go to the New Forest to cycle your bike with two twins.
Yeah, I was about to say the New Forest is just down the road from me, and I still have to do a lot of logistics, and I don't have twins of 2 years old. So yeah.
It might not be Switzerland, but it's
no.
just as much stuff and a big spreadsheet attached to it.
No, absolutely. And I was just thinking there's something about, in the end, that was part of the motivation for starting this podcast and for, the concept of everyday adventures was actually watching my children and watching them have the most fun splashing through a muddy sort of puddle on a normal boring walk, as it were, and going, okay, so how do we lose that in adulthood? Why does it always have to feel bigger and more expansive or more impressive, or and that we lose some of that fascination with just what's in front of our nose? And I think there's something about children and 2, 3, that sort of age, it's such a fun age in terms, I mean, it's horrendous in others because they're mad, but it's also, and you're constantly on your toes. But I think just in terms of their exploration of the world around them, that in a way I was thinking that is an adventure in itself for you too, to be able to recognize and tap into that and their experience as well.
Hugely. And they're at an age now where I can show them things and they're They're literally, well, actually, to be fair, they have two reactions. One is like impressed as if it's like the best thing in the world, or the other is completely like meh. Um, it's generally they're impressed like it's the best thing in the world, and I'm getting so much joy from showing them the little things and places that I love, and starting to see them form their own opinions, and yeah, they're like share some of their joy, which has been magical.
Amazing. So if anyone's listening to this and they think, whatever, whether they've got children or not, or whether or not, if they've got children, whatever age they are, and thinking, how do I find a way to access an identity that feels somehow it's been, I don't know, it's become a bit hidden, or it's become submerged in other sort of, I guess, day-to-day needs. I mean, from your experience so far, what's the piece of advice that you would give them?
Think about what you love, in terms of in that old identity. Think about the kind of core element, whether it's like for me it's the outdoors, but that might be for others, it might be music, and then find a way to bring that forward. But I think that sounds easy, it's much easier said than done, but it's about make it more, it's more of a priority than you think. It's so easy for everything to get left behind, and it's so easy to not prioritize it, to get bogged down with life and all the kind of essential day-to-day stuff. But if you can find one tiny way to incorporate it, do. And it is a priority, because it will naturally then start weaving its way into your life in many more ways, but you've got to kind of let it in and open the door to start.
I love that. Yes. Just opening up the door and making that, I think this is it. We talk about, yeah, do the things you love and make them a priority. But actually, if you make the priority just getting started, maybe, or just finding a way in, then actually you don't know where that will end up. And maybe it takes the pressure off a little bit as well to allow you to try and experiment too. Hetty, that's been so amazing. Honestly, I could keep this conversation going for so much longer. But in the interest of time, and I'm just wondering, if people are listening to this, they want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go?
The best place to find me is over on Instagram. I'm Hetty Kingston over there.
Fantastic. Okay, so we'll pop that in the show notes so people can go and find you on Instagram and follow your adventures, big and small, over there. Thank you so much again for your time. It's been really lovely speaking to you, and wishing you all the best for your adventure in the New Forest as well.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy.
Oh, take care. Bye. So, an enormous thank you to Hetty for coming on the podcast and sharing her story of motherhood, of adventuring with children, and of reconciling those various identities with such generosity. I mean, there were so many different threads I could have picked up in that conversation. I think the one that I keep coming back to is this point about control. I mean, I see it all the time over, whether it's social media memes or, little squares, or this idea that we are ultimately in control of our lives, of our destiny, of what we choose to do, and that there is some form of, I don't know whether it is superiority inherent in those who are able to navigate or be ultimately disciplined in terms of what they're able to achieve, whether that is with or without children, with all of these routines or these various activities that we should always be doing. We should be cold water swimming, you should be taking saunas, we should be getting up at 5 a.m. and doing meditation, we should be eating all the best and healthy foods, we should be working in high progress jobs and making an inspirational difference and change in the world. And that's not to say that those aren't all wonderful things, and if they work for you, fantastic. But I think it is the degree to which we ascribe worth to participating in activities, and the sense that actually, if you're not able to do those things for whatever reason, or you just don't feel you have the energy or the brain space for that at the moment, that is somehow less or not as valuable, or it is about you lacking discipline or self-control or any of these things. And I think it's worth, just because I think there is also that something that therefore becomes very difficult in terms of accessibility. And if we're talking about accessibility in the outdoors, where there are so many visible and invisible barriers, I think this idea that if only we wanted to enough, we could do it, can be, whilst it can be motivating, I think for many people, actually, it can be quite challenging and can become quite toxic and a way of, beating ourselves up for not doing what we think we ought to be able to. So I just thought that was worth exploring and thinking about, actually, if we can do the things that genuinely add to our lives, and we know they add to our lives because we feel that addition, we experience that lift in joy or lift in strength or lift in motivation or whatever it is that we're getting from the activity, then that is so wonderful. But that if we're not able to do them for whatever reason, whether we're sick or low energy or tired, or we've got other things that are pulling on our time, or it's just not working for us, then that is absolutely valid too. That doesn't mean we never will, or it doesn't mean that somehow we are less than others who are able to do those things. It just means that where we are right now is not the place. It's not the time. We're needing to nurture a different bit of ourselves, maybe. And I love that Hetty talked about the self-compassion, about allowing ourselves to go, you know what, this isn't for me right now. This is where I am. This is what I need. So if you are feeling that you're being a little bit, I don't know, overwhelmed, or the constant Instagram stroll of people living their best scroll so of people living their best lives feels too much at times, or if you're listening to the tyranny of the shoulds, and instead of motivating, it's just making you feel basically a bit crap about yourself, it might just be worth thinking about what we are being fed, what the narrative is out there, going, actually, is this something that actually serves me? Is this helping me to face the day in a way that feels healthy and positive and able to manage? And if it's not, then maybe it's not right for us. Maybe actually there's something else we need at that particular moment in time. So I will leave you with that thought. I would love to hear what you think, as always. So please do reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at Everyday Adventure Pod or Resilience at Work. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass. You can find me via my website, resiliencework.co.uk. And most importantly, if you want to join the conversation around the podcast, please come visit our Substack, Everyday Adventure Podcast. And you can find all the back catalogue of all the different episodes. There are additional recordings, some blogs. Then there's a way to have conversations around these episodes. So please do leave your comments and drop me a line and let me know what you think. In the meantime, have a fabulous week, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon with another wonderful guest. All right, take care. See you soon. Bye.